Number one, new fronts now in the US Israel-Iran war. So as of today, when we were looking at the BBC, we were looking at Deutsche Welle, we were looking at Al Jazeera, we were looking at all the news sources, and the one thing that hit us was that Saudi Arabia has joined US in strikes on Iran-backed militias in Iraq. That is quite a tectonic shift. And earlier this month, if you remember, Yemen's Houthis declared, this is on July 20th, to be exact, 20 July. The Houthis declared a maritime embargo against Saudi Arabia, opening a new front in the war, expanding attacks on tankers carrying global energy and other supplies. Remember that the Houthis did impose an embargo earlier, and there was action in the early days of the Trump administration against the Houthis. Didn't lead to that much. And the Americans lost some jets as well. They apparently fell off the deck, as Glenn informed me. And then I read up on it. So we've had the Houthis now creating a double chokehold, not one chokehold, but two. You have the Bab el-Mandeb. You have to sail through the Bab el-Mandeb and then north to reach the Suez Canal. Or when you come down the Suez Canal and you go south, you have to get through the Bab el-Mandeb to then turn east or south for African or for Asian or African shores. So this is a choke point. This is a key waterway. And now it's not just the Strait of Hormuz, but it is the Bab el-Mandeb, which is at risk. The Iranians have both of have their thumbs on both of these choke points, and Saudi Arabia has joined the US in strikes against Iran-backed militias, and Saudi Arabia was already has fought a war against the Houthis, so the Saudis are very much involved. Glenn, what is the meaning of all this? I mean, there are new theaters of war now, so educate us. I mean, you are the great strategist.
Well, let's try to make sense of the all of these seemingly simultaneous and disparate or disharmonious, wavelengths everywhere. And just one sentence on your canvassing of the past month's events before I speak about the Middle East specifically. To me, what emerged from all of that are that you touched upon over and over, irrespective of the region about which you were speaking, the country you were speaking, or even ostensibly the issue, the recurring thread are structural challenges to economic growth among the world's economies that we seem to be focusing, as one does with the stock market, on, say, a blossoming flower while not paying enough attention to the roots that are being starved of water, and so will start to show slower growth. And each of the points you mentioned really touches upon strains approaching it, I would argue, a point where there's an inflection, and the economies will start to reflect that. We're seeing this in long-term inflation issues in the U.S., but that's what seemed to be the takeaway to me from your canvassing of the cacophony of world events. In the Middle East, perhaps we can say a broadly similar thing if we take a strategic view. So we know that the out-and-out war between Iran, Israel, and the U.S. Israel, the U.S., and Iran, which has largely been a U.S.-Iran war for some time now, with Lebanon as a separate but related theater, largely stopped about 2 months ago, 10 weeks ago maybe. Since then, there have been a series of sporadic ceasefire violations, so there's been low-level conflict all the time. That has not surprised me or especially alarmed me. What's alarmed me is that the negotiations have no real basis for progress, since it has to be in both parties' interests to reach some sort of an agreement. And each party has to have enough pressure points to induce the other side to wish to make an agreement. And that is not really the case for Iran. It is for the United States. This is ironic, given that the United States is the superpower and Iran is a largely prostrate regional country. But the nature of warfare has changed, and so the victors have also changed, and that's what I'll talk about as we go forward. So we had about 10 days now of more serious conflict. Why? Because the Iranians don't see any particular reason for them to reach an agreement. They have greater influence in the region than they did before the start of the war. And it doesn't really matter, particularly, that they have a number of missile sites that are destroyed in Iran itself. For reasons I'll get to, which are essentially drones and how asymmetric warfare is changing the nature of war and the nature and potential power of the great powers, meaning the US, China, Russia. So there are short-term economic consequences that I think all of us are aware of. On the whole, price of oil has gone up 6% in the last week or so. It's spiked to over $100 a barrel. It's settling. It's not settled at all, but it's hovering around $90 a barrel, which is enough to cause global inflation and to place a strain on global growth over a period of time. And we've already had a period of time since the war began. So these strains are becoming not just theoretical, but I think progressively real as this continues. And an unanticipated consequence, possibly greater in significance than the price of oil, which is hard to imagine, is the price of fertilizers, because without oil, petroleum, you don't have fertilizers at the global scale necessary. And if you don't have fertilizers as much, or the price of them goes substantially up, the price of food goes up substantially. And the poorer the country, the greater percentage of a person's income must be devoted to surviving, to eating. So this is also an inflationary and depressive consequence. Yeah, sorry.
Glenn, if I can very quickly jump in, I must give a shout out to the managing partner of FOI managing partner, Sanjay Acharya, and the big briefing we did on the war, which talked about the change in the resource architecture, number one. Number two, the change that it'll lead to in the financial architecture. First, the resource architecture will change, because if you're not getting inputs, real inputs for the real economy, whether it is oil, whether it is gas, whether it is fertilizers, whether it is helium, which is required for semiconductor manufacturing, whether it is sulfur, we could go on. Even aluminium supply is now constrained because a lot of it was manufactured in Bahrain. So if you have a real shock to in terms of inputs, then what happens is the resource architecture will change, because these factories will have to shift, demand will have to adjust, supply will have to adjust. That in turn will lead to a change in the financial architecture, because what I call the Gulf Stream, what happens is, if you are, and I've given this example many a time, if you are Bangladesh, you want to buy gas from Qatar, the first thing you do is you go out and buy dollars, because everything is priced in dollars. And so Qatar gets these dollars, and then Qatar says, what are we going to do with these dollars? Well, then Qatar goes and buys assets in the US, whether it is real estate or private equity or venture capital or, PJ, maybe they convert into the euros and buy PSG. The football club that has won 2 back-to-back Champions Leagues. And now if Qatar is not getting those dollars from Bangladesh and all the other countries, Japan, China, etc., then it's not the Gulf Stream that kept afloat the dollar, that kept bond yields down. All of that now suddenly reverses, because Qatar and all these Gulf monarchies are running very generous social welfare states. Qatar has Olympic-sized pools. Qatar has all kinds of facilities. You've been there. You've trained people there. And so then instead of now suddenly, instead of investing dollars in Western economies Now Qatar might have to sell off its assets to fund its rather bloated expense sheets. And Qatar is better off than many other states. A lot of these Gulf states might start having to sell off Western assets. So you get the reverse Gulf Stream, and that'll obviously change the financial architecture of the world. And if that changes, then the security architecture will change. Why is Saudi Arabia now in an open pact with Pakistan? Because they don't think that America will lend troops. Yes, America can sell Patriot missiles and THAAD systems and F-16s and whatnot. But at the end of the day, the Saudis are fat and lazy. There are videos circulating of paunchy Saudi brigadier generals falling on their faces when fired upon by the Houthis. So where do you have a body of men who will do the fighting, good mercenaries who will fight, well-trained mercenaries who will fight for the Saudis? Well, Pakistan, a Sunni country, a country that borders Iran, a country that is Sunni, a country that needs money, that is always in a balance of payments crisis, that has been to the International Monetary Fund at least 17 times. So, hey ho, there we go. This is good. It's very good for the military government in Pakistan, and now suddenly a net security provider in the Gulf is Pakistan. Similarly, Turkey might have a role in the future. Turkey will certainly intervene in Iraq. It won't allow Kurdish autonomy there. Turkey is intervening already in Syria. So the whole region that'll change the entire security architecture as well. So I have said repeatedly that the 2026 Hormuz crisis may end up like the 1956 Suez crisis. What 2026 may mean for the US might very well be similar to what 1956 meant for the UK. Over to you, sir.
I don't think that this is the U.S. is dramatically more powerful relative to anyone today still than Great Britain, France were in 1956. So I don't think it will be a Suez moment, but it is a substantial inflection point. And I'd add another vignette to show the successful pressure and leverage that Iran is bringing onto the United States, the ostensible superpower. Carrying on with the fertilizer example, even in the United States, which is the world's largest producer of petroleum products, a net exporter of petroleum products, and far removed from the immediate physical crisis in the Middle East, the breadbasket of the United States, the Midwest, the agricultural sector, are feeling already the economic pressures from the rise in the cost of fertilizer. This is also the stronghold, as it were, of support for Donald Trump. But there are inflationary pressures, financial pressures that extend to the direct voting base of Donald Trump. And even that extends then from the Middle East to the Middle West to New England and everywhere in the United States, where the average person, as we talked about before, is feeling quite strongly the rise in costs of food, which is the central element in an average citizen's perceptional framework or indices for economic and social well-being.
I put it more simply, Glenn. I have long held, and we've said so, that revolutions depend on the price of bread. And we can expect massive political movements, changes, street protests in the poorer parts of the world because there's a food crisis coming, major food crisis coming. A third of the fertilizers came through the Strait of Hormuz. There isn't a ready replacement. Russia, Ukraine also produced fertilizers. They're also at war. Without modern fertilizers, production will fall. This year, we are hearing about El Nino. There has been a lot of extreme weather already. We already talked about Britain being in drought. France and um, uh, Spain aren't going to be much better. They don't produce much grain, though. And there are other parts of the world that produce grain. Indian eels will suffer. Pakistani eels will suffer. So many African countries which produce lentils, which are that are exported to Asia, they will go down. So we are looking at a major food crisis in the months ahead, and it'll be a fuel, fertilizer, and food crisis uh, hitting the poorer
Right.
economies
So
rather
for the
severely.
likes of me and a prosperous community in a rich country, that means buying a cheaper variety of tomato. For someone in many parts of the world, that means having fewer calories that they can afford to eat or obtain per day. I'm just agreeing with your point entirely. So this was the sort of the point of this is that the United States had the misfortune, or Donald Trump did, of choosing a war at one of the choke points of the world, but being unable to control the choke point. And strategists have known forever that there are critical geographical areas. These are the places over which wars are repeatedly fought. The top 5 choke points in the world. The first, the Strait of Hormuz, 20 million barrels of oil a day normally pass through that, and there's no pipeline bypass possible, and there will not be, even if there is, as there I believe is already, a dramatically enhanced construction program to create bypassing pipelines. That won't occur for 5 years anyway. The second one is the Strait of Malacca.
Just to add to your point, let's say assuming they build pipelines at war level speed, they have a national mobilization like World War II. They get the pipe to Yanbu. Okay, fine. You can still have the Bab el-Mandeb. So let's say if you've got to get your oil to China, you've got to sail all around Africa through the Mediterranean. You go around, come around the Cape of Good Hope, and then you go all the way to Asia. So even if there are pipelines, there are no easy solutions. Over to you.
No, because you touch exactly upon two of the consequent complications and problems. The next most significant, one can debate this, is slightly subjective. The choke point in the world is the Strait of Malacca. There are 94,000 ships a year that pass 270 a day. Some of you may well have been to Singapore or other parts of the Straits of Malacca and seen this. I have. It's an awesome site. That accounts for 25 to 29% of the world trade. The third is Suez, which is 12 to 14% of the world trade. The fourth is Bab el-Mandeb, which is 10 to 12% of global trade. Now, where is that? That's off the coast of Yemen. So you have Hormuz, Suez, and Bab el-Mandeb. 3 of the top 4 choke points economically and strategically in the world are in the same region. All of them are within the area that is being destabilized by the Iran-U.S. war, or have been already stopped. The traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has been largely stopped. The traffic through Bab el-Mandeb already, prior to this recent surge of Houthi engagements in the war, has dropped by 55%. And if the Bab el-Mandeb is closed, then Suez is irrelevant because it depends on Bab el-Mandeb. So all of these, as Atul pointed out, there's literally no way out, and the ways out imply that you have to go a long way around if you can get out. So this has given Iran tremendous leverage. Now, why? Why can't the greatest military power in history destroy this irritating regional power? Because the nature of warfare has changed. We have seen this with the war, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and now in the Iran-U.S. war. drones have fundamentally changed the nature of warfare. And I'll get out ahead of strategists here. Perhaps I'm ahead of the curve by a few years, but I don't think that I am too much. What has given the United States great power is spending a lot of money on capital systems, on major warships, in particular aircraft carriers, on aircraft, on major armor. And each of those three ways of projecting power can now be largely neutralized, or at least challenged, by $500 and up drones made by potentially the millions in a distributed network of back rooms, almost literally. And that's what we are seeing. In addition, the Iranians are very astute. Clever implies something pejorative and condescending, and I don't mean that at all. I mean, one can only admire the perceptiveness of their analyses and their actions. And they aren't just attacking American capital means of projecting power. They are attacking the entire region's economic infrastructure because it creates such pressure on the belligerent, the United States, to step back that it neutralizes the disproportionately greater conventional American military might. So when you attack a shopping mall, or in particular a computer company in Kuwait or the UAE, you are undoing the ability of the United States to impose its will on Iran at the cost of hostility from the region and destabilization. But if you're at the point of an existential choice, that really is a secondary consideration if you're in Tehran, isn't it? So Iran has lost
on that
internally.
point, to support what you're saying, Glenn, Kuwaitis feel under enormous pressure because Kuwait has no way out. Kuwait doesn't even have the pipeline option of Saudi Arabia. And Kuwait could very easily be devastated by Israeli strikes. They're well within range.
Absolutely.
Similarly, Iraq is fundamentally, I mean, yeah, it's divided between three ethnicities, or three groups of people, not necessarily ethnicities. One is, of course, the Shia population, which was persecuted and oppressed under Saddam Hussein. And the other, of course, are the Sunnis, Sunni Arabs, and the third are the Kurds. Now, a little bit of context here is important. Is this month, Iran conducted a spectacular funeral for Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Who was he? Well, until recently, until February, he was the supreme leader of Iran. And he died on the first day of the war, or rather, Israeli strikes killed him on the first day of the war. And contrary to generally Shia tradition, you bury the dead quite quickly. They kept his body for a while. And during the ceasefire, they took his coffin around 5 cities, or they took his coffin across 5 cities in Iran and Iraq. And the coffin traveled over 6 days. Traveled over 2,600 kilometers, that is 1,600 miles, over 6 days. And it whipped up public hysteria because the entire Shia founding myth lies in this idea of sacrifice. 72 of Hussein, along with his followers, 72 of them, charges 4,000 of Yazid's men. And all of them die fighting to the last man. And note that Khamenei referred to this in his last sermon or his last address to the nation. The two may be, maybe the same. And what this does is it feeds into the martyrdom myth that sustains Shia Iran, the theological basis of Iran. And of course, Mujtaba Khamenei, who has succeeded his father as the top Ayatollah, didn't appear. He was not seen during these funeral demonstrations, and he has not been seen since the strike. And that he may not even be alive, who knows? But the important thing is that it's whipped up nationalism and religious fervor and strengthened the regime. In contrast, Pete Hegseth, America's Secretary of War, it's he's no longer Secretary of Defense, as we know. He told U.S. Congress that Iran conflict has cost $37.5 billion so far. He needs an additional $67 billion for operations in the region. And many think that the cost is much higher because Iranian strikes have damaged American military facilities. And so the bill every day is mounting up for the US, and support for the war in the US, even amongst Donald Trump's supporters, is going down. So one side is completely fired up, and the other side is sort of, we are not so sure. Over to you, Glenn.
Well, for Iran, it's an existential issue, and for the United States, it's a war of choice that causes tomatoes to cost more, in a sense. And so who will be more committed? It's rather clear. Three final assessments, takeaways, I think, from what's happening, and we've gone on far too long, and we will unfortunately probably stint our look at India, which is too bad, but we'll get there in a moment. So logistics have always been, for any serious military analyst, the key to victory, really, rather than strategy, which all of us amateurs think about. We think we're Napoleon when we should be as a quartermaster. And the war has shown that stockpiles are of munitions, a capability of causing harm, of killing, are as critical as the capability of the systems themselves. And the U.S. has had to ramp back its military strikes because it's run out of, and I'm simplifying just a bit, of ammunition. So strategic planning and preparation is always has been, but more now than ever, is decisive in how one may wage war and who is more likely to win. That's one thing. The second is,
Glenn, just to support you, let me give you numbers on munitions, because I have it from a very dear friend of Fair Observer and FOI, a rather erudite Marine. And this is publicly information data. Okay, so 1,000 plus Tomahawk cruise missiles. That's 27% of US inventory. That's gone. Note that this is a 10-year reconstitution timeline. Approximately 23% of JASSM inventory, that's gone. Approximately 33% of SM6 and 50% of SM3 interceptors, they're gone. 1,030 plus, and by the way, this accounting is of April 2026. So these numbers are as of 24 April 2026. 1,430 plus PAC-3 interceptors, more than 50% of inventory gone. Approximately 150 THAAD, THAAD interceptors, up to 80% of theater available stock, that's gone. The entire fielded PRSM inventory, that's gone. I'll stop, Glenn, but this is just to give some numbers to back you up. So over to you.
The United States, perhaps this is a law for great powers. I'm not being facetious. I don't think it is, but at least the United States has fallen into the trap that Germany did in World War II. The Germans had the greatest tanks and artillery and so on in the world during World War II. Everyone knew this. The United States consciously decided not to care because they decided to make a serviceable tank, the Sherman, and to literally construct 10 to 100 of them for every one Panther tank or Tiger tank that the Germans built. The United States won because of industrial might, not technological brilliance. And here the United States has 13 aircraft carriers, which no one can match whatsoever. But one might ask whether it would make more sense to be able to build, as the Chinese are doing, 1,000 aircraft destroying missiles for the same cost as one aircraft carrier and at the cost of 0 human beings, or 1 million drones, all of which are capable of disrupting the straits and projecting your power. The final thing is, and this is an expression I take from the Modern War Institute, which has done some really good analyses, that cloud geography is now campaign geography, whereas the war was regional before and against military assets and the ability to project power. Now, threatened and actually targeted are companies such as Google, Microsoft, Palantir, Amazon, NVIDIA, which have regional offices in the Middle East and cloud capabilities. And that is an asymmetric thing. And the last point is a lesson that the United States applied in its Revolutionary War, and that great powers never seem to learn, is the power of asymmetric warfare. The American military never really rarely defeated strategically or tactically, I should say, the various Indian tribes and on the continent. It eventually destroyed them, but it didn't defeat them because asymmetric warfare.
The Apaches never lost, really.
That's right. That's right. Asymmetric warfare is a problem larger than a conventional military can solve. This reality is now extended not just regionally in the Middle East, but I would argue globally.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.